Next, from the Senate chamber in the state capitol, we hear senators debate the issue of a concealed carry bill as they vote to override the governor's amendatory veto of the bill passed in May. Senate President Cullerton first talks about a so-called trailer bill that is not a part of the original legislation, but would also address the issue of carrying a concealed weapon in Illinois. This runs about 35 minutes.
Further discussion, Leader Lightford.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd just like to continue by saying that it's important that our president brought forth a trailer bill to acknowledge some of the changes that needed to come forth to make our conceal and carry law stronger. I do recognize that we're up against time restraints, and having conversations that we all can agree on to get us to 36 is viable. I just hope that in the future we would come back and take a look at some of these areas that I really feel that we really need in many areas of our state to help provide a safe home for our residents, safe environment for our students and our children, safe from school. And I think this is the last time that we talk about these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Senator Katowski. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. To the bill. Governor Quinn for his leadership on this issue and his efforts to improve this legislation. In particular, I want to highlight the area on mental health reporting. This is very, very important. In the wake of the Virginia shooting, to require more direct reporting to the Department of Human Services about people who presented a clear and present danger to themselves and their community. That information has not been reported in a timely and comprehensive fashion. That's been a challenge in the state. There's hundreds of thousands of records that we do not have about people and their history of mental illness and the danger they present to themselves and their community. This more direct reporting to the state police hopefully will rectify that. In addition, the component that requires disclosure to police when someone is, I think, will help address the issue to hopefully prevent type of shootings that happen where law enforcement officers have been shot by concealed handgun permit holders in other states. Hopefully we can make sure we provide enough protection as possible for law enforcement. Again, I want to just state some of the other comments that were raised. It's important that we move forward and improve this legislation, but I appreciate the Senate President's leadership on this. But again, I want to comment on the governor's continued advocacy on this. He's pushed for this issue for over 20, 25 years, and his efforts to make sure we improve this bill.
You rise.
Will the sponsor yield, please, Mr. President?
Indicates he will yield for questions. Senator Ryder.
Thank you. Senator Cullerton, I have a question about the signage piece. And I've listened to the discussion thus far on the Senate floor and in committee. It's kind of on the notion of whether or not it was intended in House Bill 183 to require public entities or places where firearms are prohibited from posting a sign. The question is whether is legislation, you kind of indicated here that fair summation of where you're coming from on this?
President Cullerton.
That it should not be required, and that it probably wasn't intended to be required when we passed the bill. That's what my belief is.
Senator Ryder.
Mr. President, why do you think we should not require a clear posting to an individual who may be carrying a concealed firearm that they cannot carry that firearm into a school?
President Cullerton.
Yeah, I think that there are a great number of prohibited places that we put in the statute. I think that the governor's amendatory veto recognized that and included in his amendatory veto the fact that we would not need to have a sign at Holy Name Cathedral in Chicago, no guns permitted. That every L station, every bus stop that you get on in Chicago, for example, that you wouldn't have to have a sign saying no guns permitted. I think that there was just this concept that the signage had where there was owners or retail merchants as to whether or not you wanted to allow them. We have, as you know, in the law, a concept of when you drive a vehicle, you're presumed to know the rules of the road. You can't use as a defense that you don't know what the law is. So that was it is more of a practical. There would be an enormous number of signs, especially in the rural, in the metropolitan area, that where it's already against the law. There's no need to reiterate it. This bill has more training for people to get a conceal and carry license than any other state in the nation. Clearly, we'll get these permits, know what's permitted. So as a practical matter, I think it makes sense.
Senator Ryder.
And I'm glad you used that example about drivers, Mr. President, because we're taught in driver's training, and the law is clear with regards to, let's say, school zones, and yet we still post those signs, don't we? And with regards to other regulations, we not only have the regulation and law, but we take steps to make sure that the public is aware of those. And we do that because we know that sometimes the however many volumes of the Illinois compiled statutes in their car, they don't keep them all in their head. And so in certain sensitive situations, we post signs to remind them of the law. And if those areas, the schools, the church that you referred to, if it's that important to make a matter of law that we not allow someone to carry a gun there, isn't it important enough to remind the person who's now carrying the firearm that they shouldn't carry it into that place? I mean, why is that different than the school situation or than the school zone?
President Cullerton.
That's a question. Let me respond. First of all, let me correct what I said earlier, Senator. I was under the impression that churches were a prohibited place. Apparently they're not. So apparently Holy Name Cathedral will have to put a sign up saying you can't get in. But the other prohibited places don't need a sign. There's a lot of training. People will know what the prohibited places are, and they will know to follow the law.
Senator Ryder.
To the amendment, if I might, Mr. President. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen of the Senate, I think that there is probably going to be broad agreement on the issue of the immediate reporting to a police officer who asks whether or not someone's carrying a firearm, certainly with regards to the direct reporting on the mental health issue to the state police. But we have, as a body, over time, said there are certain areas in which firearms will not be allowed. And I'm assuming that the reason that we've articulated that is because we think those areas are sensitive enough that as a matter of law, regardless of where you live, regardless of who you are, we don't want a gun there. This amendment will not require those places to remind those individuals that they can't carry a firearm there. And there are example after example in our society where we train people like drivers that this is the law and remember that, and yet we post the signs because they're important enough to remind the person before they enter the school zone that, hey, you're in a school zone, because we know the consequences could be very dire. Yet, this bill suggests that we are not going to assign that importance to prohibited places under the law, such as schools. I appreciate that that means that some of our local governments and the city of Chicago are going to have to pay a little extra money. But in this society, we pay the exercise of constitutional rights. And this is no different than that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Further discussion. Senator Link, for what purpose do you rise?
To the amendment, Mr. President.
To the bill. Senator Link.
You know, it's pretty clear that concealed carry will be the law of the land at the end of this day. And it's unfortunate in my mind. But I want to commend President Cullerton for putting these 3 issues up. I wish we could have put more. And I'm going to elaborate on just one issue. I do a lot of traveling in other states. And when I'm in those states, I watch the local news, I read the local newspapers. And I see that these states that have concealed carry, you read articles about people either in a bar or coming out of a bar and have a shooting. Well, I got to tell you one thing, it's quite evident, and all of us know that alcohol and guns don't mix. I know we put this thing in here, 50% business. You know, it's okay to go into this restaurant with 50% of the business. That you can look at a lot of places that have carry-out pizzas, and I could name those types of bars. 90% of their business isn't inside, it's out. They get a pizza, but over 50% of their business is food. So they would qualify to let you carry your gun in there. And somebody today said in committee, I think it was, said, well, all these people are well trained before they get the concealed carry. Well, let me use the analogy. We train and we test people when they get a driver's license. And we expect them to be exemplary drivers. But let's look at the statistics of how many DUIs there are and how many people are killed because of DUIs. I don't think that was their intent when they went and got educated, trained to get that driver's license, but yet it happened because alcohol and driving don't mix. I think we all know that. And what did we do years ago? We lowered the amount that you could actually drink before you got a DUI. But today we're going to say that it's okay to drink some places and have a gun. We know what can happen. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Let's put the prohibitive on alcohol into this bill and make sure that people care are doing it. Senator Katowski mentioned the mental health. Well, let's make sure you're mentally competent when you're not drinking to use that gun. I would hope we could go a little bit farther on this and maybe pass a bill that we could at least say Illinois is in line with the rest of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Senator Oberweis. For what purpose do you rise?
Question of the sponsor.
Indicates he will yield for questions. Senator Oberweis.
Mr. President, I may vote in favor of this bill, but I have just one quick question, and that's regarding the signage. I understand your point that for those who go through this training, they probably will know where they can carry and where they can't carry. But my question is, for those of us who don't go through the training, who aren't licensed, it seems to me that it's possible to be confused, for me to be confused, as you were, for instance, on whether or not churches were prohibited. So I'm not quite sure I understand why we wouldn't ask all places where it's prohibited to have a sign in those places. I just don't understand the reason to not ask for those signs. Can you clarify that for me?
President Cullerton.
Well, perhaps I should start by talking about what is a prohibited place. And I guess it's just the logistics of this is pretty enormous. So all schools, preschools, all government buildings, all courts, all local government buildings, correctional facilities, medical facilities, that'd be all the hospitals, public transportation, they're different because you don't know if it's a bar or a restaurant. Playgrounds, parks, colleges and universities, gaming facilities, stadiums, libraries, airports, amusement parks. I mean, no guns allowed in all of these places. These signs, it's a big logistical issue. The people who, as you pointed out, are trained know not to bring these weapons there. And so it just makes sense to me that since those people are presumed to know the law, the rest of the public will learn where the guns are not allowed, and that's why I proposed the bill. Now, if anybody's confused about where there's guns or not, I'm sure they can inquire. They'll find out this is what's, they don't have to worry. They can go to a zoo, they can go to the airport. People are not supposed to bring guns there.
Senator Oberweis.
So in your opinion, it would improve the safety of all, or the people of Illinois, to not have signs in those places where it's prohibited, or it's just too overwhelmingly difficult to put signs in those places where it's prohibited? I mean, it's clear that there have been cases where people have forgot where it's prohibited or where not, including airports.
President Cullerton.
Well, I hope I've answered your question.
Senator Oberweis. Okay, thank you. Further, our last speaker seeking recognition is Leader Radonio. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. First, a question for the sponsor.
Indicates he will yield for a question. Leader Radonio.
Senator, on the signage portion of the bill, which seems to be causing the most consternation to people here, is there anything in this bill that would prohibit somebody from posting a sign in a prohibited place?
President Cullerton.
No, not at all, and it's a good point. If they want to put a sign up, if there's some uncertainty, they could certainly do so.
Leader Radonio.
It seems to me another way to look at this issue is that we are allowing for local control. So if a local school board decides they want to remind people that it is prohibited, they can be free to place that sign. Okay. Thank you for that clarification. In order to save me from rising too many times, I just want to comment on this amendment as well as then the bill. I support this amendment. I think this is not the last time we're going to be discussing this issue by any means. Obviously, here we are at the 99th hour, adding things to the bill that I expect will be widely supported. I intend to vote for this amendment. I intend to vote for the override as well, and I think that that speaks volumes about the good work that this legislature has done. It was a very, very difficult issue. People genuinely disagree on how this should be handled. I think the bill passed respects the Second Amendment rights, but it also has very reasonable restrictions in it. We're adding some more right now, tweaking it, and we will continue to do that. So for those people that are still uncomfortable with it, we'll continue to have discussions, but I hope everyone will support not only this amendment, but the override of the bill as well, so that we have something reasonable and constitutional in place come tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. President Cullerton to close.
Yes, thank you, and I appreciate the support of Senator Radonio. Again, we know this is a somewhat controversial issue, and we were able to, in a very short period of time, come up with a consensus, I hope, on these three items. We're certainly open to any other improvements to the bill as we see how it plays out, if it does become the law. But if it becomes law, it's going to be immediate, and as a result, I wanted to see if we can make these corrections today with a supermajority requirement, and hope that we can continue to have dialogue should the bill become the law. So I'd ask for an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. As the President just indicated, as the bill has an immediate effective date, it does require 36 votes. Ladies and gentlemen, the question is, shall House Bill 1453 pass? All those in favor will vote aye. Opposed, nay. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Secretary, take the record. On that question, there are 45 voting aye, 13 voting nay, 0 voting present. House Bill 1453, having received the required constitutional majority, is declared passed. Ladies and gentlemen, if you will turn to the supplemental calendar number 1, the bottom motion in writing to override special recommendations, House bills. We have House Bill 183. Senator Forby, you wish to proceed? Mr. Secretary, please read the motion.
I move that House Bill 183 do pass, notwithstanding the specific recommendations of the governor, signed by Senator Forby.
Senator Forby, to your motion.
Thank you. I'm here today to say I want to override the governor on 183. We've talked about this bill before. We went over it time after time. We've been to committees a lot of times. Everybody's worked really hard on this bill, and we're going to be the last state in the United States that has a conceal and carry. It's going to be a big day for the state of Illinois. This bill has some issues. Everybody wasn't on board with it, but it's everything we discussed you come up with, and I just ask for your vote to override.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? Senator Raoul, for what purpose do you rise?
To the gentleman's motion.
To the motion. Senator Raoul.
I rise in support of the motion to override. And I do so in sort of a conflicted way because I support the elements offered by the governor's amendatory veto. And as you know, Mr. President, I spent most of my spring in a room negotiating this issue of concealed carry, given that we were given a mandate by the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals to get this job done initially by June 9th. And as the end of the session crept up on us, the pressure was rising for us to come to some sort of consensus. And like in many matters, when you're engaged in a negotiation, you had to put yourself aside in the interest of the collective good. And public safety was always my top priority while I was in the room. Many of the elements in the amendatory veto were elements that were part of an original House Bill 183, of which I was the sponsor. And during the course of negotiations, some of those elements were negotiated away. Now, after the Attorney General was granted a 30-day stay, the Seventh Circuit has made clear that there's no more time. We are here on July 9th. And if the members of this chamber have the interests of public safety at their heart, they would vote yes to override. Because if we do not override on today, at 12:01 a.m. tomorrow, July 10th, there are no restrictions upon people who want to carry handguns in the public way. No restrictions on prohibited places, no restrictions on intoxication level. So somebody could walk into a school tomorrow if we don't override at 3-4 times the intoxication level that we bar people from driving, loaded with a handgun with a 20-bullet magazine in it, and they will not be in violation of the law if we do not override. So let's be clear as to what your choices are. You can cast a political vote and say, I want to be on record as supporting these things in the mandatory veto, which I understand I'm on record as supporting those things because I introduced them. Those aren't new ideas. But if you cast a no vote on this override, the House has already voted to override. That means there's no veto, right? That means there's no bill, there's no law restricting how people can carry guns on a public way. So you'll be, in essence, voting for drunk people to be allowed to carry guns in any of these sensitive places. So I really encourage you to think about your vote. As Leo Radonio pointed out on the previous bill, this is an issue that I commit that I will continue working on this issue. But we are upon a deadline that has been imposed by the Seventh Circuit. Today is the day. Unlike the other issue, today is the day of real consequence if we do nothing on this bill. I urge you to vote yes to override.
Thank you. Further discussion? Senator Collins, for what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. President. To the motion.
To the motion, Senator Collins.
Senator Forby, I know it's a foregone conclusion that you will be successful in the vote to override the governor's amendatory veto. And I respect my colleague, Senator Kwame Raoul, for the position that he's taken. This is a very difficult decision for me to make. And the reason it is a difficult, and it's not going to be a political decision that I'm making, it's a position that I'm making out of respect for the mothers and the fathers who have lost children to senseless gun violence in my district, but not only in my district, but in this nation. So to say that, let me use this analogy for me. I think it's a difficult decision, and I've been given a Hobson's choice. And by that, I mean a false choice. I've heard that if we do not vote to override the amendatory veto, that we would be, in reference to the Seventh Circuit, we would be allowing for a constitutional carry, open, a wild, wild west. But let me just say that I support the governor's amendatory veto for many reasons that have already been enumerated, in reference to the alcohol and the carrying of guns, the number of guns, the size of the ammunition clip, that it preempts home rule. And I'm not going to reiterate or re-articulate things that I've ever heard why I support the amendatory veto. But because it's a choice, a bad choice, or no choice, it's a false choice, it's a Hobson's choice between two bad choices. One, the bill that I don't like, House Bill 183, because it did not take in consideration common sense suggestions or guidelines for why we should have conceal and carry. And the other choice, that if we don't vote for this, we will have a wild, wild west. Well, let me just say, we have already in my district a wild, wild west. 74 people were shot over the July 4th weekend. Of those 74 shot, 12 were killed or died, children. And let me just say that we already have where individuals come into schools utilizing ammunition clips. NIU is a perfect example. So for me to say that, for me to vote to override the amendatory veto is not a decision or a position I can take out of reference or reverence for those mothers and fathers who have lost children to senseless gun violence, and it is already a wild, wild west. For that reason, I will be voting no. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion, Senator Jacobs. For what purpose do you rise?
To the bill, Mr. President.
To the motion, Senator Jacobs.
I just want to start out by saying, you know, I like Pat Quinn. I like Governor Quinn. I think he's a nice man. He's been very helpful to my district, and I greatly appreciate that from him. But I think he needs to learn how to count. The fact is, in second grade, I learned from Mrs. Cushy, my teacher, how to add 1 + 1 to make 2. Anyone that doesn't understand that we're going to run this bill over his objection doesn't understand government. And what really frustrates me about it is we've called a special session to be here. We're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of taxpayers' money to solve the pension problem, and we're working on the gun bill. We've already passed one bill today on the gun bill, a rider to the bill, a trailer bill. The bill's not even dry. We don't even know what the bill's going to do. I mean, this is getting to be ridiculous. Governor Quinn, this is the Illinois Senate. That's the House. I would appreciate if you'd work with us in our session period. We begin in January end about the end of May. We don't like to come back here and take care of little items. But the one thing that he might do, the governor might go to the court and ask the court to set a date for us to fix the pension problem. Because it seems like certain things are the only thing that we react to positively. I just hope for a positive vote on this. You know, Governor Quinn, you're fond of saying what does he like to say? He likes to say, the will of the people is the law of the land. And the people in Illinois want the right to carry. It is about to become law. I want to salute Senator Gary Forby for doing an excellent job and standing up to a lot of people who said he couldn't get it done. But most importantly, I just want Governor Quinn to work with the committee and work. Yesterday I listened to the committee on, and I'm off subject a little bit here, but give me 1 second, please, on the pensions. And Governor Quinn didn't attend the meeting. It was so important that he held these special sessions. It's so important that we have this deadline, but Governor Quinn didn't show up. I want Governor Quinn to get in the game.
Further discussion, Senator Bivens. For what purpose do you rise?
To the motion, Mr. President.
To the motion, Senator Bivens.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the gentleman's motion. It's time today that we join 49 other states in this country with a conceal and carry bill. You know, the chaos that Senator Raul was referring to has already actually been occurring. You've had state's attorneys throughout Illinois deciding that they will not prosecute in this interim that the bill was not signed, it went unsigned. You have law enforcement saying they will arrest. Exactly what you've described, Senator, is exactly what will happen if we don't pass this, if we vote to override today. This shouldn't have happened. It should have been signed immediately to avoid this. Could you imagine a police officer responding to a call of a man with a gun in a convenience store or a park? They would respond in the way they're supposed to. Maybe it's a citizen thinking they can actually carry legitimately and legally, but imagine the chaos that would, and I'm surprised someone hasn't been hurt in the interim that this bill has not been signed. So I rise in support. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, Senator Forby, do you wish to close? Senator Forby.
I just want to thank everybody for their comments and what they said. And I know we all, you know, that's the American way, that everybody's not a yes and not a no. Not what makes the world go around. So today I'm just asking for a yes vote on the conceal and carry.
Ladies and gentlemen, the question is, shall House Bill 183 pass, notwithstanding the veto of the governor? All those in favor will vote aye. Opposed, nay. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Secretary, take the record. On that question, there are 41 voting ayes, 17 voting nays, 0 voting present. House Bill 183, having received the required 3/5 majority, is declared passed, notwithstanding the veto of the governor.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.